Bien des souvenirs, des choses, des personnages étonnants que j'ai rencontrés à cette époque-là.
يقدم شيء لن يعين
This little blue spot in our universe.
What is the sound of now?
Because you don't understand art anyway.
Hello and welcome to Make Art Not War, a podcast in which we talk to artists about how they feel their work relates to the world that we live in. So today we're going to continue our conversation with Michael Gallen, who's an Irish composer whom I spoke to in episode 1. So if you haven't heard that, you might want to check that out. Today we're going to go into more depth about his actual music, his influences, and his processes. I've caught up on a few elements of your music that seem to come back because you talked about John Adams and Glass. No, was it Glass and what you had? What was it you had on that mini disc?
Glass, Arvo, Pärt. It was, and the pieces were. It was Glass. It was one of. I have to say, the Glass didn't kind of land with me as much. John Adams. It was shaker loops and Short Ride in a Fast Machine. Right. Oh my God, Short Ride in a Fast Machine. Just like it is.
That's the coolest piece in the world.
Banging piece of music. It's just incredible.
Pretty amazing.
And then Arvo, Pärt. It was the Tabula Rasa album. Yeah. And what got me was Fratres for violin and piano.
Yeah.
I just think it's the most remarkable piece of music.
Hear a few of those things, but you really have, at least to my ears, totally your own voice, and you've built up these little idioms that I see like in different places. You've got, even in your folk stuff, you've got this thing with like slow repeated chords on the piano, and correct me if I'm wrong, but when I like your earlier stuff, they were just kind of, more basic, and now they're like, wow, now there's a little bit of a rhythmic shift in there, and it's like, oh yeah, so you're playing against something else, but there's still these constant chords. You've also got these driving rhythms. You've got this driving timpani thing. It sounds almost like techno just for a few minutes.
Is this how to go off like a rocket?
Yeah, so cool. Great piece. Yeah. And you've also got these kind of string textures, using harmonics and stuff. So it's really nice. And obviously your use of the voice, that's like pretty central. Is that a very Irish thing? That do people like sing at home a lot?
I mean, I know it's definitely part of our tradition from the point of view of people's sense of the centrality of song to both the social world and to their own personal expression. I mean, it's I didn't understand the extent of it until I moved to France. I was hanging out with really great musicians, and we'd come home after a concert, and there'd be a party, and I'd be kind of like, "Who's for a song?"
Right, and people go,
yeah, exactly. Nobody sings. Like nobody wants to sing.
I can just picture the situation.
I think it's a funny one in Ireland. Like I have a broader thing about Irish history and classical music, but in terms of that, I feel like we haven't we don't really have a conservatoire system. It's sort of grown in the last maybe 10, 15 years, and there's the Royal Irish Academy of Music, but it's not. I guess in France where there's a funnel system, that's sort of, basically handpicking musicians from all the regions and then bringing them to, sort of more centralized conservatoires and more centralized. And I feel that what that does is create, an incredible infrastructure of professional classical musicians. But I think what it also does is makes people feel that if they're not the person who is achieving the distinction in their local conservatoire, that's where their journey with music ends, and that their right to be a musician then sort of gets taken away. And obviously that, there's a very strong traditional music scene in Rennes, but in terms of the amount of people who can just pick up a guitar and play a song, it's nothing like in Ireland. Whereas if, the lovely thing I think in Ireland is if you're in a bar and there's a sing-song, everybody will sing and everybody will be kind of pressurized to sing a little bit. And you'll find that people might have one song that they sing all the time and they're not necessarily a great singer. But some of the most beautiful experiences as a listener that I've had have been, seeing a 70-year-old farmer, who's sat silently in the corner for a whole evening, kind of sit up and, clutch his pint to his chest and sing like an Adele song, and really feel like there's that actually it's like them cracking their shell open and, showing you that this is me, like this is me underneath all the layers, this is the part of me that I don't get to express or share all the time. And that's there in the culture. And I think that's the thing that certainly for me, I don't want to lose when the projects, when all of those different composition techniques you talk about or whatever, or, all of the different ideas that are floating around. I think it's really important that kernel is at the center of it. And to go back to the bigger question, I feel that's in part also because, the Gaelic population in Ireland, like the majority of the population, didn't have access to concert halls and, opera houses for centuries when that was what European tradition was, And I think in lieu of that, there was a huge finesse that went into people's capacity to tell a story in front of a room of people or to stand up and to sing unaccompanied to a room of people. And I think in the ornamentation and in the way that the language and the music interact with one another, there's a depth that is, in my opinion, equal to the depth of a Mahler symphony. And I think that it would be a shame then as an Irish composer in 2024 not to feel like that's part of the lineage of, the composition tradition that I come from. And actually with Bád and Alltar, that was one of the things that helped me in a way at a certain point get those gremlins off my shoulder, because it's been a while since I've made a project on this scale that hasn't been through my own company, where I haven't been kind of choosing the musicians themselves. And so there's always that sense of what will the expectation be of me from the people that commission the piece. And it's commissioned from 3 orchestras, so it's, an even broader thing. And the idea that I would begin the piece myself singing unaccompanied really gave me the sense of, well, that's going to allow me to root this in the place that I want it to be rooted. And then it goes wherever it goes. But I know that the starting point will be one that I feel is very authentic and that, I can really connect with.
There's actually something incredible in what you're talking about, because it just shows how no matter what happens to a people, they always need and they always find a way to somehow express what they need to express by whatever means. So, they created their own avenues to just sharing something that was just like so powerful and that they needed to do. So that's like really, that's incredible. I mean, that you should compare that to a Mahler symphony. I just think that's great, because of course, at the end of the day, what really counts is that sense of communication. So, maybe in, late 19th century, early 20th century, Vienna, it was that,
Absolutely.
And then, but, for in another part of the world, it's something entirely different. And at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. What matters is what happens between the...
Yeah, and I think in the same way, both are experiences that open up your sense of, that they're a chasm of another world that, and I think, with Mahler, it's kind of like completely pulling the tapestry apart, and you just get this sense of a vast other world. And I think, sometimes with Sean-Nós, or with, this sort of unaccompanied song, it's just giving you a crack of light into the same vastness. And as I say, it can sometimes happen, not necessarily the best singer, and it's a place in the performer or in this where the performer and the song meet that opens up a different realm, but it is also, I think there's something quite particular in the unaccompanied song tradition in Ireland that, that the way that the singer's voice kind of ornaments certain words or certain notes, or it's hard to put your finger on, but it, you know, in the same way as like that the finest plain chant, you know, you feel is sort of like a direct access between the singer and the God that they're, you know, trying to communicate with, that there's just something very, very powerful in it.
Am shaken am der grene am kein lubi am torker gal am
When you sing at the beginning of Bad on Alltar, I mean, you're ornamenting a bit. That's not written. Is that just improvised, or?
It's improvised within a certain shape, you know, as in I know what the melody is and I know roughly where the ornaments are going to come, you know, but it's not set, you know, and then even at the point where the orchestra come in behind, you know, there's a little bit of pull in it, you know, I kind of know where the meeting points are, where I kind of have to be with a chord change. But
is this the first time you've written a piece for folk band? And
yes,
right, yeah. And has that been challenging in some ways, like, you know, like for timing questions, because it's a pretty complicated piece? That's another thing I wanted to talk to you about, was where do these crazy rhythms come from? You know, is that just from studying music, or is that just that's it's a felt thing, more like you feel it and then you find a way to write it down?
Yeah, no, the rhythms are definitely felt. I think that journey started with trying to figure out speech patterns, like even speech patterns in prayers, you know, that with call and response, where they're extremely complex rhythms that people in crowds just naturally fall into. With Elsewhere, I was with the main character, Celine, I was trying to find a way that to articulate for an audience what her internal dialogue might be like, you know, and that it was on this sort of constant run, you know, that you know, you would feel that it's like a tap that you can't switch off. And the closest thing I could come to was the litanies that I would have heard when I was a child at, you know, novenas, that, you know, I guess that the generation, maybe 2 generations above mine, would have, you know, been very Catholic in Ireland, you know, and sort of these things of, you know, saints' names being called out, and then, you know, people saying pray for us right to it. But, you know, it might be like Saint Ignatius Loyola, pray for us, Saint Francis of Assisi, pray for us, whatever. And actually, when you kind of put all those rhythms together, it's kind of jumping back and forth between, like, you know, 13/8 and 11/8 and whatever. And people are always coming in with the pray for us in exactly the right moment. And that type of then approach to rhythm became really interesting for me, where I could sort of, with singers initially, internalize a pattern, and that would then sort of manifest as a very complex rhythmic score. And so I did that quite a lot with Elsewhere, and it then became something that I was quite interested in exploring.
Because you have that in Impi as well.
In Impi, I have that, yeah. And then, you know, at the end of the first movement in Baden Alltar, then, you know, I love the way that those rhythms can build up a sense of fervor, you know, that the faster they become, and with the increased intensity of the performance, that you can really start getting this unhinged feeling that's a bit, I guess, like a dervish. And I'm very interested in, you know, say, an orchestra manifesting that energy and feeling that energy. You know, like I felt like, say, a Saturday night's performance was kind of better than Friday's, and it was in part because I felt I could feel the orchestra getting harnessed onto my voice, and onto the other singers' voices. You could sort of, you know, get that sense that the blood was starting to rise a little bit. And that then carries into the next movement, you know, and there's a quality of performance that I think, you know, comes from, you know, with those complex rhythms, when you finally sit into them and you're kind of like, fuck, I can hear it now. Like, it's a groove,
right.
like, you know.
Yeah, it's exactly that. I think that I felt that there was that moment when we started to groove a bit, and we weren't just counting. I think I wrote that to you in a message, is that when we first started, it was just like, oh my God, 5/16, oh, we go to 7/16. And I was like, okay, trying to follow Fiona and everything. After a while, you start to latch on in an auditory way to what's going on, and then you have cues, and then you start to have an actual, like a dialogue, rather than just like doing math in your head all the time. And that's a really nice moment. And actually, everything is starting to sit together much more nicely, and it becomes less nervous. Because it's just more, even Fiona.
Absolutely, yeah. And Fiona has had to go through this with me several times. Big believer in bringing musicians outside of their comfort zone.
Yeah.
Because I think when they then discover a new comfort zone, there's a quality of, you know, performance. There's a real sort of energy that comes from that. That can be hard when people are able to just read their entire way through something. And it's, you know, definitely with Elsewhere, I think all of the singers at the beginning, you know, had that panic of, this is so complex on the score. I never set out to make something more complex than it needs to be. I like always am composing with a feel in my head, and I always sing the stuff out loud, and insofar as I can, play people's instrumental parts or get other musicians, to play a viola part or play whatever, so that I can kind of hear that there is a musicality in it.
Do you sing a lot when you compose, or do you compose at the piano, or?
I feel like the longer I do it, the less I know about how I compose. I leave myself lots and lots and lots of voice notes, where I'll be out for a walk or for a drive or whatever, and initially it'll be just a melodic idea, but then it's how that melodic idea can fit rhythmically with other things. I have a process on the piano that is just like free association, where I'll kind of improvise and then I'll find things that I like and I'll store them away.
Do you record what you play at the piano?
Yeah, if when there's a good idea there, I'll do that. But then I try, insofar as possible, not to compose at the piano when I'm, say, composing for orchestra, because what I want is for the timbres of the orchestral instruments to dictate what the music is going to be. And I've found in the past that, spending too long on the piano with a project, playing something that's eventually going to be played by brass or flute or whatever like that, you can lose sensibility, and you can also lose out on a whole realm of what those instruments are able to do that piano can't.
Yeah, it turns into kind of like a piano reduction, and then you're just like orchestrating, and it's not like painting.
Exactly. Yeah. So I do quite a lot of, as I say, being out for a walk. With the making of this project, there was a lot of pushing a pram up and down a hill to get Kuan to go to sleep. So I would then, I would just hear a certain way that brass and strings might overlap, or where a harmony might go, or how sort of how a rhythm might turn into a polyrhythm and then go into a different meter, that kind of thing. And I'll generally try to remind myself then via a voice note of how that can happen.
Did you at one point kind of, because maybe you didn't have a lot of orchestral music around you when you were a kid, so how did, you talked about writing for choir, so how did the orchestra come into that, and did you have to soak up a lot of stuff to start to write, or was it quite natural?
Sort of. So Wild Stories, which was the suite that had How to Go Up Like a Rocket, that was the first orchestral project that I worked on, and I had to learn on the job quite a lot. On occasion I'll take a day to study a score. Say there are some scores of Kaija Saariaho or John Adams or whoever that I have at home, or, Debussy or whatever, that's, I listen through and, make a sort of time code for where the score is on a certain recording, and then go back and highlight sections where there's a sound that I find particularly interesting, or a harmony that I find particularly interesting. And then I'll kind of do a little bit of work on figuring out what that is and how it works and stuff like that. And it's never with a particular project in mind, but, then I find when I come to something like this, where sometimes the creative process can be, quite condensed.
Short,
so this one was very, very condensed, and, you're in a high pressure situation. Sometimes then those things come back out again, and you kind of, there's a certain way of making instruments interact with one another, or certainly that those can be a starting off point, those references can be a starting off point for a certain orchestral idea or timbre. It's discovery all the time. What I have gotten much better at over the years is not, trying to do mock-ups of things, and, just really kind of being able to hear the orchestra in my head. And then what I tend to do from that point is I'll make maps of the pieces. So I'll draw diagrams of the different movements and where they'll go, with a sense of where the energy needs to be in the orchestra at certain times.
A graphical map?
Graphical map, yeah. I kind of have these big long rolls of A3 paper, and I'll just roll it out and I stick it up on the wall, and that's my sort of shortcut to get from what I'm hearing in my head to something that's written down, because obviously the problem is even 10 seconds of orchestral music that you hear in your head, you can't just scribble it out and you're like, there it is, certainly I can't, so what I need to do is draw it in such a way that I can put that up, and then I can start to score it out, and I slow down those moments where you have a little crystalline thought about how something needs to sound or feel.
Do you thrive from pressure, or or do you prefer like not having pressure? Or
I mean, I prefer not to have pressure at this stage. Yeah, I mean, I do thrive on deadlines, and even for much longer projects, I think I've got a good sense of how long it'll take to compose a certain scene or section. And so what I do is, like, for a project, like an opera that's going to be 2 hours long, where there's no physical way to write down that amount of notes in a month. What I do is I have a big calendar up on the wall, and I kind of say to myself, okay, this scene I feel is a long one. It's going to take me, let's say, 16 days of composition to do. And then I'll kind of map out 16 days of composition on my calendar and then have a deadline for that scene. And I kind of do that for the full thing, in order that it doesn't become, a bottleneck at the end.
Right, so you're pretty organized, actually.
I mean, in that respect, yes, but that's if I'm setting the deadline. So it's a different thing when it's a commission piece and it's like it needs to be for this date. So in the instance of this piece, it grew in size because 3 orchestras came in for the commission. So the commission amount was more, so they wanted more music for it. But the ONB, who are the original commissioners, always wanted it for this date. So it became twice the length of music, but for the same date.
And now,
I can definitely go to that place where there's a huge intensity of creative energy, and I'm not sleeping, and I'm not whatever, I'm not going for walks, I'm not doing anything, and the music just kind of will flow out of me. But that's no fun to live with
for others that are around you.
And yeah, and I guess more that now now that I have a family, that's a consideration, and it's not. And I suppose I also feel that the repercussions of working like that, now start to kind of drift into other projects, and and ultimately it's not, I think you can romanticize that at a certain point in your life. And, then really what I'm interested in now is longevity. I'm very interested in what music I'm going to be writing in 30 years time. And so I just want to A, be still doing it, and B, have health to be able to do it at that later point. I always, at the end of projects, I stop sleeping. That's been something that I've had since, word
of
go.
Projects,
as in there's at the point of highest intensity of composition for me, I hear the music all the time. And it'll be in loops and loops and loops in my head. And I could go to bed and go to sleep at 10, 11 o'clock at night, but I'll wake up without exception at maybe 1 or 2 with my head full of music. And I've learned now that the best thing to do is just to get up and work.
Thanks so much for listening to Make Art Not War. For our next episode, I'm really excited because we've got a very special guest who's called Rashid Masharawi, who's a Palestinian filmmaker. He was actually the first Palestinian filmmaker to be accepted in Cannes. And he's been going all around the world right now. I think he's maybe in Japan, I'm not sure, presenting a new project, which is a collaborative film made with people that are actually in Gaza, in war-ridden Gaza right now, over the past year. So do subscribe if you want to hear more about that, because it's going to be a really great episode. And if you would like to support the show further, you could also go to buymeacoffee/David Shivers Music and make a contribution there. This is also a video podcast, so you can check out youtube.com/DavidShiversMusic. Or if you prefer reading, you can also read it on my blog, which is
This little blue spot in our universe.
What is the sound?
Thanks so much,
Sound of
and
now.
see you next time.
Because you don't understand art anyway.